The Valkyrie transport shuddered violently as another explosion bloomed against the storm-racked sky above Kethara Prime. Sergeant Donovan Wraith watched through the cramped passenger compartment's viewport as bioships descended through the planet's upper atmosphere. The sight made his gut clench with familiar dread. 30 seconds to drop zone, the pilot's voice crackled through the Vox. Looks like the Hive's outer sectors are already taking spore hits. Wraith keyed his comm. Green 1, final equipment check. We have one chance at this extraction. Corporal Marcus Steele hefted his hotshot volley gun, its weight reassuring in his scarred hands. Heavy weapons green, Sergeant. Trooper Gaius Forge looked up from his Auspex scanner, the machine spirit flickering erratically. Vox array operational, but I'm reading massive electromagnetic interference. The Tyranids are already jamming communications. Demolitions expert Balthazar Knox patted the melter charges secured to his belt. Breach kit ready. From his position near the rear hatch, Sniper Damian Ward adjusted his Longlars scope. Ready, Sergeant. Medic Serena Vale finished checking her field surgery kit, her face grim, acknowledging that she was also ready. Wraith nodded, though doubt gnawed at him like an old wound. His last extraction mission had ended in disaster, an entire squad consumed by Tyranid digestion pools while he watched helplessly from orbit. The screams still echoed in his mind. The Valkyrie lurched sideways as debris from a collapsing spire clipped its port wing. Through the viewport, Wraith could see Hive City Kethara stretched below them like a cancer across the planet's surface. Massive bioships hung in the atmosphere like predatory void whales, disgorging countless spores that rained down on the Hive's sprawling districts. Contact! Contact! The pilot shouted. Incoming flyers, coordinates 37 Mark IV. The transport bucked as Lars fire erupted from its defensive turrets. Through the reinforced glass, Wraith glimpsed nightmare shapes with leathery wings diving through the smoke clouds. Gargoyles, their screeching cries audible even over the engine noise. Brace for impact. The Valkyrie's starboard engine exploded in a gout of promethium flame. The transport spun wildly, its hull groaning under the stress as it plummeted toward the Hive City's mid-level industrial sector. Wraith felt his stomach drop as the ground rushed up to meet them. The crash was a symphony of screaming metal and shattering ceramite. Wraith's harness cut into his chest as the Valkyrie carved a smoking furrow through an abandoned manufactory complex. Sparks showered the passenger compartment as they slid to a grinding halt against a massive fuel silo. Sound off, Wraith barked, tasting blood where he'd bitten his tongue. One by one, his squad reported in, bruised and battered, but alive. The pilot wasn't so fortunate. Steele pulled the man's tags from his mangled corpse while Vale checked the copilot for signs of life. He'll live, she reported, applying a stim injector to the unconscious man's neck. But he won't be flying anything soon. Forge's Auspex squealed with warning runes. Sergeant, I'm reading movement. Lots of it. Bioforms converging on our position from multiple vectors. Through the Valkyrie's broken canopy, Wraith could see the truth of their situation. The industrial sector stretched away in all directions, a maze of towering manufactories and processing plants. Black smoke rose from dozens of fires, and in the distance, the unmistakable sound of Lars fire and screaming marked where the planetary defense force was making its last stands. What's our extraction timeline? He asked Forge. The communications specialist's face paled as he consulted his chronometer. 72 hours has been cut to 36. The fleet's pulling back faster than anticipated. Knox spat a curse that would have made a dock worker blush. 36 hours to find 3 high-value targets in a hive city of 50 million, with Xenos crawling over everything. The Emperor protects, Wraith said automatically, though his faith felt thin as paper. We move fast and quiet. Primary objective is Lord Commander Maximus Draconis, nephew to the planetary governor. He has access codes to the defense grid. Secondary targets are Magos Biologis Theta 9 and Navigator Lydia Stellaris. Vale finished treating the copilot and shouldered her pack. What about him? Steele Knox, secure the crash site. Set up a defensive perimeter but keep it quiet. We can't afford to draw attention. Wraith checked his chronometer. The copilot stays here. If we're not back in 34 hours, he finds his own way off this rock. They moved out into the dying hive, leaving the smoking wreckage behind. The industrial sector was a maze of towering spires and connecting bridges, most of them dark now as power grids failed across the city. The air tasted of ozone and decay, with an underlying sweetness that made Wraith's skin crawl. He'd smelled that scent before, on other worlds where the Tyranids had fed. The streets were chaos. Civilians fled in panic-stricken mobs, their faces twisted with terror as they clutched whatever possessions they could carry. PDF troopers tried to maintain order, but their formations were breaking down as reports of Xeno's contact came from every sector. "Movement 2 o'clock, Ward whispered through the vox. Wraith followed his sniper's gaze to see a mass of chitinous shapes swarming over a collapsed hab block. Hormagaunts, their blade arms gleaming wetly in the smoke-filtered light. They moved with fast, leaping from surface to surface as they hunted fleeing civilians. "Let them pass," Wraith ordered, hating himself for the words. "We can't save everyone." But the choice was taken from him as a PDF squad rounded the corner, their sergeant screaming orders as they opened fire on the Xeno's swarm. Las beams lanced through the air, dropping several Hormagaunts but drawing the attention of dozens more. "Frack," Steele muttered, bringing his hotshot volley gun to bear. "Can't let the guard die for nothing." Squad Green 1 opened fire, their disciplined volleys cutting into the Hormagaunt pack. Wraith's lasgun spat crimson death, while Steele's volley gun chewed through chitin and flesh. Knox's shotgun boomed as he covered their flanks, and Ward's sniper rifle cracked from an overwatch position on a nearby gantry. The Xenos died in droves, but more kept coming. Their death shrieks echoed off the manufactory walls as they pressed their attack with mindless hunger. "Ammo check," Wraith called out as he slammed a fresh power pack into his weapon. 60%, Steele reported, his volley gun smoking from sustained fire. "We need to move," Vale shouted over the gunfire. "The noise will draw more of them." A new voice cut through the chaos. "Stormtroopers. This way," a figure in the black uniform of the commissariat beckoned from a service tunnel entrance. Commissar's cap askew and uniform torn, but alive and fighting. Wraith made the tactical decision in seconds. Covering fire. Move to the tunnel. They bounded by teams, each group providing cover while the other advanced. The surviving PDF troopers followed, their sergeant clutching a wounded arm. Behind them, more Hormagaunts poured into the plaza, their alien cries growing louder. The service tunnel was mercifully narrow, forcing the Xenos to attack in smaller numbers. The commissar identified himself as Draven Blackwood, formerly attached to the 19th Kethara Rifles. "The entire regiment's been scattered," he reported as they moved through the maintenance ways. "Last I heard, the Lord Commander was holed up in Hive Spire Mortalis, with the other VIPs, the spires being cut off since the Xenos hit the power grid." Forge's Auspex painted the tunnel ahead in sickly green light. Biosignatures everywhere. The whole city is infested. They emerged into a vast transport hub, its maglev platforms silent and dark. Bodies lay scattered across the concourse, but these weren't normal casualty patterns. The corpses looked wrong, partially dissolved, as though something had begun digesting them from the inside out. "Ripper swarms," Blackwood said grimly. "Saw them consume an entire hab block in 20 minutes. They come up through the drainage systems." Ward's voice crackled through the vox from his overwatch position. "Multiple contacts approaching the hub. Looks like termagants, maybe 40 strong." Wraith studied the tactical situation. The spire rose before them like a mountain of ferrocrete and plasteel, its upper levels disappearing into the smoke-choked sky. Getting inside would require crossing 2 kilometers of open ground while under fire from an unknown number of hostiles. "We split here," he decided. "Steele, take Knox and Blackwood. Find the Magos. His laboratory should be in the research levels mid-spire. Forge, Vale, you're with me. We get the Lord Commander. Ward maintains overwatch and coordinates extraction." Steele nodded grimly. "What about the navigator?" "Third priority. We get what we can and get out." The termagant swarm hit the transport hub like a living wave. The Xenos warriors moved with disturbing coordination, their flesh-borer weapons spitting living ammunition that burrowed into cover and exploded in showers of acid. Green ones scattered, using the hub's infrastructure for cover as they laid down suppressing fire. Wraith's team took the left approach, moving through a series of commercial districts toward the Spire's base. The streets were clogged with abandoned vehicles and debris, forcing them to move carefully through the urban maze. Above them, the Spire's upper levels flickered with occasional muzzle flashes where defenders still held out. "Vox contact," Forge reported, adjusting his communications array. "Multiple Imperial frequencies, but they're weak. Massive interference from the bioships." They reached the Spire's outer perimeter to find it transformed into a fortress. Hastily erected barricades blocked the main entrances, manned by a mixture of PDF troopers, Administratum security, and civilian volunteers. The defenders looked haggard and desperate, their ammunition running low. A PDF captain recognized their storm trooper armor and waved them through. "Thank the Emperor you're here. We've been holding this position for 18 hours, but the Xenos keep probing our defenses. They're learning." Wraith didn't like the sound of that. Tyranids adapted quickly, evolving new tactics with each engagement. What worked against them once rarely worked twice. The Spire's interior was a maze of corridors and chambers, its population centers converted into refugee camps. Thousands of civilians huddled in the communal areas, their faces gaunt with terror and hunger. Many bore wounds from acid burns or flesh-borer impacts, testament to the Xenos' assault on the outer districts. "Lord Commander Draconis is in the command bunker," the captain informed them. "Sublevel 7, security section. Fair warning, he's not in good shape." They descended through layers of reinforced ferrocrete, past security checkpoints manned by increasingly nervous guards. The bunker was a tomb of flickering lumens and recycled air, its corridors echoing with the distant sound of weapons fire from above. The command bunker was alive with activity. Tactical displays showed the spreading Xenos infestation across the hive, while communications officers tried desperately to maintain contact with scattered Imperial forces. At the center of it all sat Lord Commander Maximus Draconis. The planetary governor's nephew was younger than Wraith had expected, perhaps 30 standard years, with the soft features of nobility unmarked by campaign scars. But his eyes held intelligence and determination, and he didn't flinch when the storm troopers entered his sanctuary. "You're the extraction team," he said without preamble. "About time. I have information that could save this world." Wraith doubted that. Kethara Prime was already lost, consumed by the hungry darkness of Hive Fleet Devourer. But the Lord Commander's intelligence might save other worlds from the same fate. "The defense grid has a critical vulnerability," Draconis continued, wincing as he shifted position. A field dressing covered his left shoulder, dark with dried blood. "The Tyranids are targeting the primary relay stations, but they don't know about the backup network. With the right codes, we could coordinate a counterattack." Vale moved to examine his wounds, while Forge worked to establish secure communications with the rest of the squad. The medic's expression was grim as she completed her assessment. "Some shrapnel nicked an artery," she reported quietly. "He's been bleeding internally for hours. I can stabilize him, but he needs surgery." The bunker shook as something large impacted the levels above. Dust rained from the ceiling as the lights flickered, and somewhere in the distance, an alarm began to wail. "Contact on level 3, a security officer reported. "Defensive positions compromised. They're inside the spire." Wraith made his decision. "We move now. Forge, raise steel, find out their status." Static answered him. The bioelectric interference was getting worse, probably from spore clouds seeding the atmosphere with alien organisms. They were on their own. Meanwhile, Steele's team had fought their way to the research levels through a nightmare of dissolving infrastructure. The Tyranid organisms seemed to excrete some kind of universal solvent, breaking down Imperial architecture and absorbing the materials for their own use. Walls that had stood for centuries crumbled at the touch of alien secretions. "This way," Blackwood directed, his bolt pistol smoking from recent use. The Magos should be in Laboratory Complex 7. Nox triggered a melter charge behind them, sealing a corridor that had become infested with something that looked like mobile coral. The explosive heat turned a section of wall into glowing slag, but already he could see new growth beginning to sprout from the edges. They found Magos Biologist Theta 9 in his private laboratory, a chamber filled with specimens and analytical equipment. The tech priest himself was a towering figure of red robes and mechanical augmentations, his multiple servo arms working frantically at a bank of cogitators. "Stormtroopers," he said without looking up, his voice a mechanical rasp. "I calculate a 72.3% probability that you have come to extract me from this compromised position." "That's the plan," Steele confirmed, keeping one eye on the laboratory's sealed blast doors. "What's your status?" "Fascinating," the Magos replied, finally turning to face them. Where his face should have been, a collection of optical sensors and data ports regarded them with inhuman attention. "I have been analyzing samples of the Tyranid biomatter. Their adaptive capabilities exceed all previous calculations." Nox was getting nervous. "Can we move this along? Those blast doors won't hold forever." As if summoned by his words, something began scraping at the metal barriers. The sound was rhythmic and persistent, like claws on ceramite. "The specimens," Theta 9 continued, apparently oblivious to the threat. "They demonstrate unprecedented evolutionary acceleration. Observe." He gestured to a containment unit where something writhed behind armored glass. The creature inside was roughly humanoid, but wrong in every detail, its flesh rippling with constant mutation as it pressed against its prison. "I isolated this organism from a captured Ripper swarm. In the past 6 hours, it has undergone 17 distinct evolutionary phases, each adapting to the containment protocols I implemented." The scraping at the blast door intensified, joined by a wet sliding sound that made Blackwood's skin crawl. "Magos," Steele said urgently, "we need to move, now." "Indeed. I require 14 minutes to complete the data purge and secure my research materials." "You've got 2, Nox replied, shouldering his demolitions pack, "unless you want to explain your theories to the bugs personally." The blast door began to smoke and bubble as something on the other side was melting through. Through the metal, they could hear chittering voices. Theta 9's servo arms moved quickly, downloading terabytes of data to encrypted storage devices while simultaneously activating the laboratory's destruction protocols. "The Omnissiah protects," he intoned, "but contingencies must be observed." The door exploded inward in a shower of molten metal and alien acid. Through the breach came a tide of horrors that defied easy description. Ripper swarms flowed like living carpet, their countless mouths gnashing hungrily, while larger forms pushed through behind them. Steele's volley gun opened up immediately, its rapid high-power energy bolts tearing through the smaller organisms but barely slowing the advance. Nox's shotgun boomed as he backed toward the laboratory's secondary exit, each shot clearing a small space in the swarm. "Data secure," Theta 9 announced as his laboratory began to burn around him, initiating extremis protocols. The Magos raised one servo arm, revealing a weapon Steele didn't recognize. It looked like a combination of flamer and chemical sprayer, its barrel crackling with electrical discharge. When he fired it, the effect was immediate and devastating. The weapon spat a stream of luminous green fluid that dissolved Tyranid biomatter on contact. Where it struck, the alien organisms simply ceased to exist, their complex molecular structures breaking down into component atoms. The advancing swarm recoiled as though struck by a physical blow. "Prototype biodissolver," the tech priest explained as they retreated. "Highly effective against Tyranid cellular matrices, also highly unstable." They fought their way through collapsing corridors as the spire shook under renewed assault. The Tyranids were adapting to Imperial defensive measures with terrifying speed, evolving new forms to counter each tactic the defenders employed. Nox's charges sealed passages behind them, but the explosions seemed to attract more hostiles rather than fewer. The Xenos were drawn to violence like moths to flame, their hunger growing stronger with each death. Extraction point is compromised, Blackwood reported, consulting a handheld Auspex. Multiple bioform signatures between us and the rendezvous. Above them, Ward watched the battle unfold through his rifle scope. The sniper had nestled into the spire's upper reaches, his longlars giving him clear fields of fire across the approaches. But what he saw filled him with growing dread. "Green actual, this is Ward," he transmitted, hoping the Vox would penetrate the growing interference. "We've got problems, big ones. There's something coordinating the enemy advance." His scope tracked a massive shape moving through the lower levels of the spire, too large to be a warrior, too organized to be a simple brood beast. Whatever it was, the other Tyranids deferred to it with obvious reverence. Ward centered his crosshairs and squeezed the trigger. The long Lars discharged with a brilliant flash, sending a laser bolt through smoke and debris to strike the creature center mass. It splashed harmlessly on chitinous armor plating. The thing turned toward his position with malevolent intelligence burning in its multiple eyes. Then it opened its mouth and screamed. The sound was beyond human hearing, a psychic shriek that bypassed the ears and struck directly at the mind. Ward felt his vision blur as blood ran from his nose, his hands shaking as he tried to maintain his grip on the rifle. Throughout the spire, every Tyranid organism responded to the call. Their attacks intensified, coordinated now by some alien will that transcended individual consciousness. The hive mind had noticed the Imperial resistance and was moving to crush it. In the command bunker, Wraith felt the psychic pressure like a weight settling on his soul. Around him, Imperial personnel collapsed as weaker minds snapped under the alien presence. Lord Commander Draconis gripped his chair, his face pale but determined. "We need to move," the nobleman said through gritted teeth. "That sound, it's calling them. They know where we are." Forge's equipment was going haywire, displays flickering as the machine spirits struggled against alien influence. Vox communications down, electromagnetic interference off the scale. "We're blind." Vale finished applying a fresh dressing to Draconis' wounds, her field surgery kit now nearly empty. "He's stable, but barely. Any significant exertion could restart the internal bleeding." The bunker's blast door began to buckle inward as something large pressed against it from outside. Through the reinforced metal, they could hear the sound of claws on ceramite and the wet sliding of alien flesh. "Secondary exit," Wraith ordered, supporting the wounded Lord Commander. "We head for the Underhive. It's our only chance." They moved through maintenance corridors as the upper levels of the spire echoed with violence. Behind them, the command bunker's defenses finally failed in a crescendo of screaming metal and alien hunger. The Underhive of Kethara was a world unto itself, a vast network of tunnels and chambers that extended deep into the planet's crust. Originally mining excavations, they had been expanded over millennia into a sprawling underworld where the dregs of Imperial society scraped out their existence. Now those tunnels ran with alien corruption. Tyranid biomatter clung to the walls like luminous moss, pulsing with its own inner light. The air was thick with spores that made natural breathing difficult and vision unreliable. "This way," Forge directed, his Auspex providing the only reliable navigation in the perpetual gloom. "There should be a maintenance shaft that leads to the industrial sector." They moved in single file through passages barely wide enough for a man, their weapons ready, but held low to avoid accidentally striking the walls. The biomatter seemed to react to their presence, growing brighter as they passed, and dimming again in their wake. Draconis was weakening, his breathing shallow and irregular. Vale had given him the last of her stims, but without proper medical facilities, his condition would only deteriorate. "The codes," he whispered to Wraith as they paused at a junction. "In case I don't make it. Defense grid authentication is Kethara 7749 Beta 22 Theta. Remember that." Wraith memorized the sequence, though he doubted it would make any difference now. The defense grid was probably already compromised, its weapons satellites turned to scrap by Tyranid bioships. A new sound echoed through the tunnels ahead of them, something between a growl and a mechanical whine. Forge's Auspex painted the source in hostile red, a large bioform moving through the darkness with predatory patience. Lictor, Wraith identified, recognizing the signature from previous encounters. Stealth Hunter, it's been tracking us. The creature struck without warning, its chameleonic skin allowing it to blend perfectly with the alien growth covering the tunnel walls. Razor-sharp claws swept through the air where Wraith's head had been a moment before, gouging deep furrows in the ferrocrete. Forge's lasgun spat crimson death, its beam illuminating the lictor in stark detail. Vale dragged Lord Commander Draconis behind cover as the squad opened fire. Las bolts burnt into the creature rapidly as its dead body continued towards them from its initial inertia. Through the tunnels, they could hear the chittering screeches as the swarm closed in on their location. "Move!" Wraith barked. "They know where we are." They ran through passages that seemed to shift and change around them, the alien growth responding to their presence with increasing hostility. Acidic secretions dripped from the ceiling, forcing them to weave between droplets that could eat through armor plating. Behind them, the sound of pursuit grew louder. Not just the chittering of smaller organisms, but the heavy tread of something massive forcing its way through tunnels too small to contain it. Forge's Auspex was screaming with contact warnings, its display showing hostiles converging from every direction. "Dead end ahead," he reported. The tunnel system's been compromised. They emerged into a vast chamber that had once been a water treatment facility. Now it had been transformed into something from nightmare. Massive organic pools filled the space, their surfaces rippling with digestive enzymes that dissolved everything they touched. Bodies floated in the pools, citizens who had fled to the Underhive only to find an even worse fate waiting. Their flesh was partially dissolved, breaking down into its component proteins and minerals to feed the Tyranid war machine. "Digestion chambers," Vale said in horror. "They're processing the entire population." At the chamber's far end, a tunnel mouth offered the possibility of escape, but between them and freedom lay hundreds of meters of open ground, dominated by the feeding pools and the creatures that tended them. Ripper swarms covered every surface, their countless mouths working constantly to break down organic matter. Larger organisms moved between the pools, their purpose unclear but obviously malevolent. "We can't go around," Wraith assessed. "It has to be through." Lord Commander Draconis tried to stand, his face grey with blood loss. "Leave me," he gasped. "Take the codes and go. Save whoever you can." "No one gets left behind," Wraith replied, though he knew it was probably a lie. The Imperial Guard had many mottos, most of them optimistic. Reality was usually harsher. They moved into the chamber by bounds, each member of the squad covering the others as they advanced from cover to cover. The Ripper swarms seemed almost oblivious to their presence, too focused on their feeding to notice new prey. That changed when Forge accidentally kicked a piece of debris into one of the digestion pools. The splash was small, barely audible, but every organism in the chamber turned toward the sound. The Rippers moved like a tide of living hunger, flowing across the chamber floor with disturbing speed. Behind them came larger forms, their purpose now clear as they herded the Imperial soldiers toward the waiting pools. "Suppressing fire," Wraith ordered, his lasgun cutting down the leading edge of the swarm. "Keep moving." They fought their way across the chamber, leaving a trail of alien corpses in their wake. Vale stumbled, nearly dropping Lord Commander Draconis as a Ripper latched onto her leg. The creature's teeth found gaps in her armor, drawing blood as it tried to burrow into her flesh. She smashed it repeatedly with her rifle butt, but not before it had wounded her severely. "I can't carry him much farther," she admitted, her leg weeping blood through the torn fabric of her uniform. The tunnel mouth was still 50 meters away, but it might as well have been 50 kilometers. That's when the explosions began. Nox's demolition charges detonated in sequence, bringing down sections of the chamber's ceiling in crushing avalanches of rubble. The falling debris created barriers that channeled the Tyranid's swarm into kill zones, but the demolition's expert wasn't done. His final charge was something special, an experimental device he'd been saving for desperate circumstances. The melter bomb erupted in a sphere of superheated plasma, vaporizing everything within a 20-meter radius. The explosion created the opening they needed. While the surviving Tyranids reeled from the blast, the squad made their final dash for the tunnel. Vale half-carried, half-dragged Lord Commander Draconis, while the others provided covering fire. They reached the tunnel mouth just as reinforcements arrived from the spire above. Steele's team dropped through a maintenance shaft, the Commissar bleeding from multiple wounds, while Nox limped on a makeshift crutch. "Magos?" Wraith asked. "Dead," Steele reported grimly. "Sacrificed himself to seal a breach, but we got his data." Behind them, the digestion chamber was filling with fresh hostiles. Whatever coordination controlled the Tyranid swarm, it wasn't giving up easily. They moved deeper into the underhive, following passages that seemed to stretch endlessly into the planet's core. The air grew thicker and more humid, heavy with alien spores. "How much farther?" Vale asked, her wounded leg barely supporting her weight. Forge consulted his auspex, though the readings were increasingly unreliable. 2 kilometers to the alternate extraction point, if it's still there. That was a significant assumption. The Adeptus Mechanicus landing pad sat on a plateau overlooking the hive's industrial sector, its ferrocrete surface scarred by years of heavy transport landings. But when the squad finally reached it, they found only twisted wreckage and acid-burned metal. "Extraction birds gone," Nox reported, his voice hollow with exhaustion. "Looks like the gargoyles got it." The remains of what had once been a Navy transport lay scattered across the pad, its hull breached in dozens of places. Alien biomatter clung to the wreckage like predatory moss, slowly dissolving the metal. "Emergency flare," Wraith ordered, though hope was a luxury they could no longer afford. "Maybe someone's still listening." Nox's shot off a flare. The explosion lit up the night sky, its light visible for kilometers in every direction. If any Imperial ships remained, they would see it. But the signal also revealed their position to every hostile in the immediate area. Through the darkness, they could hear the answering cries of Tyranid organisms as the swarm moved to investigate the disturbance. "Defensive positions," Wraith called out, though their options were limited. The landing pad offered little cover, its open design intended to accommodate large aircraft rather than provide protection for infantry. They set up what defense they could, using the wreckage of the transport as cover, while Ward found a sniper's perch in the pad's control tower. Ammunition was running low, medical supplies were exhausted, and their communications equipment was failing under the constant alien interference. Vale tended to the wounded as best she could, but her supplies were nearly gone. Nox's calf was infected where a ripper had bitten him, the wound showing signs of alien contamination. Blackwood's bolt pistol had become unserviceable after taking acid damage, leaving him with only his power sword. "Contact," Ward reported from his overwatch position. "Multiple bioforms approaching from the north. Looks like a full assault wave." Steele's volley gun whined its defiance, rapid Lars bolts searing through chitin and flesh with devastating effect, its barrel glowing cherry red from sustained fire. Nox hobbled forward to provide covering fire, his shotgun booming as he worked the pump. Ward's sniper rifle cracked from the tower, each shot precisely placed to eliminate priority targets. But even his skill had limits, and the Tyranids were learning to use their fallen as cover. "Air contact," Forge shouted, pointing skyward. "Gargoyle flocks, incoming from multiple vectors." The flying creatures dove from the smoke-filled sky like demons, their leathery wings carrying them in attack runs that strafed the landing pad with bioplasma. The corrosive projectiles ate through ferrocrete and metal alike, creating new hazards with each pass. Wraith triggered his last frag grenade, the explosion scattering a cluster of hormagaunts but barely making a dent in the overall assault. Around him, his squad fought with the desperate efficiency of veterans, but they were being overwhelmed by sheer numbers. "Fall back to the tower," he ordered, though retreat was merely delaying the inevitable. They retreated by teams, each group covering the others as they moved toward the dubious safety of the control structure. The tower was solid ferrocrete, its walls thick enough to stop most small arms fire, but it was also a trap. Once inside, they would have nowhere else to run. Nox triggered his final melter charge. the device detonating in the center of the advancing swarm. The explosion vaporized dozens of organisms and created a temporary gap in their lines, but fresh reinforcements were already moving to fill the void. That's when they heard it, the distant booming of aircraft engines approaching through the smoke. An Imperial Navy Thunderhawk, its hull scarred by battle damage but still airworthy, descended toward the landing pad like a mechanical angel of salvation. "The flare worked," Forge said in amazement. "Someone's still out there." But the Thunderhawk's arrival had also attracted unwanted attention. Gargoyle flocks swarmed toward the aircraft, their bioplasma weapons targeting its engines and flight surfaces. The pilot was good, weaving between the attacks with skill, but the odds were against him. "Covering fire," Wraith shouted. "Keep those flyers off the extraction bird." Green One poured fire into the sky, their weapons adding to the Thunderhawk's defensive turrets. Las beams and bolt rounds intersected with the diving gargoyles, creating a deadly lattice of gunfire above the landing pad. Many of the alien flyers spiraled down, their death shrieks echoing across the plateau. But more kept coming, drawn by the sound of battle and the promise of fresh prey. The Thunderhawk touched down with a bone-jarring impact, its landing gear deploying at the last possible moment. The rear assault ramp was already dropping as the aircraft's weapons systems engaged the surrounding hostiles. "Go! Go! Go!" the pilot's voice crackled through the external speakers. They ran for the ramp through a gauntlet of alien fire, their boots pounding against ferrocrete as death reached for them from every direction. Nox stumbled, his wounded leg finally giving out, but steel grabbed him under the arms and half carried him towards salvation. Vale was hit by a termagant's flesh borer round, the living ammunition burrowing into her shoulder before exploding in a shower of acid. She screamed but kept running, her fear and adrenaline overriding the pain. Ward was the last to reach the ramp, his sniper rifle providing covering fire as he backed toward the aircraft. A gargoyle dove at him, claws extended, but his point-blank shot took its head off in a spray of alien ichor. The ramp was closing as the Thunderhawk lifted off, its engines straining against the planet's gravity. "Clear of the pad," the pilot reported. "Heading for orbit. Medical bay is forward, through the bulkhead." But their escape was far from certain. The Thunderhawk climbed through a sky filled with hostile bioships. Through the upper atmosphere interceptor organisms peeled off from the larger vessels, their living weapons targeting the fleeing aircraft. The pilot threw the Thunderhawk into a series of violent evasive maneuvers, its hull groaning under the stress as G-forces pressed the passengers into their seats. Outside, bioplasma bursts lit up the darkness. "Engine 2 is hit," the co-pilot reported, losing power on the starboard side. The aircraft shuddered as alien fire found its mark, acid eating through armored hull plating. Warning lights flashed red throughout the passenger compartment, and the smell of burning promethium filled the recycled air. But the pilot held his course, pushing the damaged bird toward the waiting fleet. Behind them, Kethara Prime was a dying world, its surface crawling with alien life as the Tyranids consumed everything they had built. "Fleet's pulling back," the pilot announced. "We're the last bird off the ground." Through the viewports, they could see Imperial warships accelerating away from the planet, their weapon batteries firing into the bioship swarms. The retreat was organized but urgent, each vessel racing to reach minimum safe distance before the Tyranids could overwhelm them. The Thunderhawk's damaged engines finally gave out as they reached the fleet's perimeter. The aircraft went into a controlled glide, its pilot fighting to maintain control as they approached the recovery bay of a strike cruiser. "Brace for impact," he warned. "This is going to be rough." The crash landing was controlled chaos, the Thunderhawk sliding across the hangar deck in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. Emergency crews were already running toward the wreckage as the aircraft came to rest against a blast barrier. Wraith was the first out of the wreckage, his stormtrooper armor scratched and dented, but intact. Around him, his surviving squad members emerged from the crash, their faces grim with the knowledge of what they had witnessed. "Medical team to Hangar 7, someone was calling over the ship's Vox system. "Casualties incoming." Vale was unconscious, the acid from the flesh bore around having spread through her system. Ward's leg was broken, the bones snapped during the crash landing. Knox was burning with fever, the alien infection spreading through his bloodstream. But they were alive. Against all odds, Green One had survived the hell of Kethara Prime. Forge clutched the data slate containing the Magos' research. The information had cost lives to obtain, but it might save millions more on other worlds. Debrief in 1 hour, a Navy officer informed Wraith as medical personnel took charge of his wounded. Fleet Command wants a full tactical assessment. Wraith nodded, though his thoughts were still on the planet below. 50 million souls had called Kethara Prime home. Now it was a feast for alien monsters, its population consumed to fuel the Tyranid war machine.